Welcome to another episode of the Home Service CEO Playbook podcast, where we help home service business owners and aspiring home service business owners talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the lessons learned as a home service business owner. I'm very excited. As you know, this is a newer podcast, and I've been trying to put out more quality episodes than just quantity, and get to have my new friend Wes Barefoot on. Wes is does a couple things. Successful franchise consultant with FranChoice, runs a ShelfGenie franchise for multiple years, as well as was, in addition, a business owner with Koala Installation, which he was able to build and exit. And we're going to talk about just kind of the lessons, trials, and tribulations, the good, the bad, and the ugly of running home service companies. But without further ado, Wes, it's great to bring you on. How you doing, man?
Doing good, man. I appreciate you having me, and I love the concept of this podcast. I think it's a really cool angle, and wish someone would have started this type of a podcast years ago. But glad that you're tackling it, because I think there's a lot to be said about home service franchise businesses, in particularly. I think it's a category that gets overlooked far too often. When people do start exploring the world of franchising, there's a lot, I think, to like about home service franchise businesses, as you're well aware. But there's also challenges, just like there are in any business. And I think more people should be talking about, what is it really like to own, operate, and scale a business, because it's certainly not all good days or good moments out of every day. So appreciate you having me here. I look forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting. Putting out content is it's something I made a conscious effort to do more of. And I was listening to Alex Hormozy on a podcast, and someone asked him about the content, and he said that, believe it or not, he would actually do more. Like, he never regretted putting out content and how much it matters.
Yeah.
So I like putting out this stuff. Interesting thing I just learned. The average consumer, we were talking about, kids and how busy things are with streaming service, which we could talk about more. But the average consumer now needs 7 hours of content from you in 11 different ways, in 4 different places, for them to truly trust you. And so it's interesting, like, you do this podcast with me, maybe you put it to your channels. The candidates you work with as a franchise consultant, they may digest 7 hours of your content before calling you.
Yeah.
But when they do, they'll be really serious. So I thought that was an interesting stat.
It is. It is. And, it makes sense, right? Like, if I think about the people that I really follow and value, their opinion on things, it's probably been far more than 7 hours, that I've consumed. Some of that may be longer form podcasts, but it makes sense, especially in this day and age where there is so much content going out from so many different people and so many places. So yeah, I think it's important. And I think it's important that, people can sense that you're genuine through your content, right? Not just trying to, showcase a highlight reel, and not just trying, you and I talk about business ownership the majority of the time. If we're putting out content, I think it's important that you try to shed light on the full picture of what business ownership is like, and not try to make it sound like it's easier or more glamorous than it is, or all glamorous, I guess I should say. I mean, it's, for us, been incredibly rewarding, and there's far more upside than there is downside, but it's rough at times. And there's just things that I think, until you're in it, experiencing it yourself, you can't fully appreciate it. But people that are in it, I think should talk openly about the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Absolutely. So let's walk through the process of, how'd you get into ShelfGenie? I think I actually met the founder of ShelfGenie at a franchise event, actually at your event at FranChoice. How did you get into that? How did that come about?
Yeah, man. So, my kind of entrance into franchising, I think, is like most people's, where it wasn't intentional. I wasn't, sitting around dreaming about getting into the franchise industry. I went to business school and, for the longest time, just thought I wanted a good corporate gig, right? And to climb the corporate ladder. And so I did that for 3 or so years after college. And thankfully, I pretty quickly realized that the corporate grind was not what I wanted to do for, however many years of my working life. So fell backwards into franchising. I went to work initially for a company called 101 Mobility, which is not a cell phone company. A lot of people like used to walk in the front door, asking about cell phone plans. But they're actually a like accessibility and mobility equipment company. So, primarily for people with physical challenges. So things like wheelchair ramps and stair lifts and platform lifts. And that company was just founded in Wilmington, North Carolina, where we live. And I met the founders, and they had very recently started franchising the business at the time that I met them. So I didn't know anything about franchising. I didn't know anything about accessibility equipment, but compared to what I had been doing, which was working for a large company, trying to kind of grind my way one rung of the ladder at a time, these guys had a startup, fast-paced company. They were looking to grow. So anyways, I got involved with them, worked there for 3 or 4 years, which is where I really, learned the basics of franchising and like how franchising works. Got into doing some franchise sales and development for them. So, started helping them expand the footprint of franchisees, which is then what opened the door for me to actually go work at ShelfGenie. I took over their franchise development, and this would have been 2016, I think. So Alan Young, who was the founder and CEO at the time, who I believe you've met, hired me, came in. ShelfGenie was a brand that had been around since 2007, franchising. And like a lot of brands, they grew pretty quickly for, a 4 or 5 year clip. And then they, hit a little bit of a plateau in terms of franchise growth, new franchise growth. And they just had to really work on shoring some things up internally and, building out some of their support systems and really making sure the franchisees that were already in the business had what they needed to go be successful. And, so I kind of came in at the tail end of that plateau where their franchise growth had been kind of stagnant for, 18 months or so. So then I was kind of tasked with, getting ShelfGenie back on the map and getting the franchise growth headed in the right direction again, which, we were able to do over a 3 year period or so. But throughout all this time, I'm, learning about franchising. I'm, surrounded by people that are just way more entrepreneurially minded. I'd been helping other people evaluate, these franchises and get into business for themselves. So naturally, my wife and I had kind of started having conversations amongst ourselves about, hey, is business ownership something we should really be, thinking about? And, my wife was in pharmaceutical sales, and our oldest daughter's 7. So when my wife was out on maternity leave with our first kid, she actually got laid off by her pharmaceutical company. And, it was, I guess, okay from an HR standpoint because it was
While she was on maternity leave.
while, yeah. But it was like a mass layoff, right? So like the company laid off like 60% of their sales force nationally, which I guess is why it was okay from an HR standpoint, which sounds crazy, right? And at the time it was a little scary and a little unsettling, but like we look back on that now, and that was easily like one of the best things that could have happened to us because, number one, she was really stressed about the idea of going back to work. You get a 3-month maternity leave, in corporate America in most cases. And that's not a lot of time if you're a mother that's just had a baby, and then like I was traveling a ton. So, then it was basically we put our daughter in daycare full time. And, look, I understand a lot of people do that. That just wasn't something we were really comfortable with, especially my wife. So she was really struggling with that. And so that's when we really kind of ramped up discussions of like, what else could we do? My wife's brilliant. She's very hardworking. She's ambitious. Like, she likes to produce. So she definitely didn't see herself just being a stay at home mom, for a long period of time. So, long story short, I'd been working at ShelfGenie for about a year or so. Really loved the business model, and we can go into more detail if you'd like. Why I really like that particular business model. But, anyways, it became clear to me that, like, look, she would crush it. Running this type of business. This would give us a really good stepping stone into business ownership. So we ended up buying the Wilmington, North Carolina, and Myrtle Beach, South Carolina territories for ShelfGenie, and that was 6 years ago this month. So still own that business. My wife's really been the one that's kind of built it and grown it into what it is today. But we have a great team in place, and have really, really been able to scale that to a business that provides really good income for us, but also gives us what I think most other people are looking for when they get into business for themselves, which is more time freedom, more control of their time. And it's allowed us to do other things as well, including, now we have 3 kids. So including spend a lot of time with our kids and everything that comes with that.
That's awesome. So kind of just like good timing, right? Bad timing at first when they were able to let her go, but
Yeah.
then you guys turned it into lemons into lemonade.
Yep.
What when did you feel like the business started to have that freedom? Like when you guys first started right away, was it pretty easy, or like the first year? Like what did that look like?
Yeah. Yeah. This is a big question, right? Because that's what everyone wants to really understand and get a sense of if they're evaluating a franchise, right? I think most people get held back and decide not to do a franchise because they're more worried about like what the first 3 to 6 months are going to look like than they're worried about like, hey, long term, can I be successful? I think most people, if they've done the right due diligence and really have the right attributes to be a business owner, they believe they can be successful long term. It's the ramp up that scares people, right? It's like, what does the beginning look like? That's where there's the most uncertainty. So it's a good question for that reason. No, for us, it was not like instant overnight success and overnight freedom. My wife really, really worked hard. I mean, she still works hard, just in a different way. But for the first 2 years, man, she was grinding. I mean, for the first at least 6 months, maybe closer to 9 months, like, she ran pretty much every sales appointment herself. And for those listening, ShelfGenie, we do custom pull-out shelving and custom closet systems, right? So it's a home improvement type product, and it is very customized, right? So it's a very, I guess you'd say, consultative approach to sales, right? There's not a one size fits all option for our clients. So the salespeople, or we call them designers, they go in and they spend quite a bit of time in a prospective client's home, talking to them about their pain points and understanding, what options we could offer that would resolve these pain points the best. And so my wife really, really dug in and kind of mastered that process. But for the first 6 to 9 months, like, she was basically a salesperson for this business. That's how she was spending most of her time.
So just to clarify, pharmaceutical background, pharmaceutical sales. She was great at
Yeah.
sales. She transferred that, basically treated her role as like a sales job. Like everything
Yeah.
else, you hired a GM, I assume, and she did the sales job, and then which she was doing anyway, right? So it's like that's one of the
Yeah.
things. People come to me and they say, "Is this semi-absentee, this business?" And I say, "Are you a semi-absentee owner?" I have no idea, right? To tell a business model, one restoration company from another, or whatever the business you're in, they're not semi-absentee because of the system. They're semi-absentee usually because of the owner. Like I run Voda franchisor semi-absentee, if you will. I do things like this, podcasts, and I focus on my core skills, but I still have a job. And I always think it's interesting. People want to get out of a job to not have a like you want to have a job anyway. So she
Right.
spent most of her time on the job of selling in the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And God, I think there's so much we could talk about on the whole semi-absentee topic, because I totally agree that you really can't just slap a term like that on a business model, because it's really not the business model that makes it a semi-absentee business or not. It's really the owner, right? And the skill set that the owner has and their ability to build a team and delegate. You could probably argue that certain types of businesses lend themselves better to that semi-absentee approach. Hire a manager, put them in place to run the day-to-day. But no, for us, and I think in most home service businesses, the owner needs to be highly involved in the beginning. They need to really learn the different roles and functions of the business in order to then be able to start building out that team and to delegate. Because if you compare a service-based business to most of your brick and mortar businesses, service businesses just tend to have more moving parts and pieces, right? So I think it's a little more difficult for the owner to really provide the necessary oversight to a team if they don't fully understand everything that goes into those different moving parts and pieces of the business. So, we didn't even have a GM. I was still working full time when we started this, but, I was able to help out on the back end. I mean, ShelfGenie is a very simple business compared to, I'd say the vast majority of other franchises out there. Simple does not necessarily mean easy, but simple in that it doesn't have as many moving parts and pieces. We were able to run it as a home-based business for the first couple of years, meaning we had a storage unit. We didn't have a showroom or a warehouse. We have all of those things today, but it wasn't necessary in the beginning. So I kind of managed the installers, and you could think of that more as like the operation side of the business, where she focused more on marketing and sales, and thankfully, because I had worked for ShelfGenie for a while, I was able to really help her see the bigger picture, right? So for a period of time, it did feel like she bought herself a job as a, custom pull out shelving salesperson. But, we knew that wasn't the end game. And we knew that, for us to really get out of this what we wanted to, we needed to build a team. And I think her really digging in and learning that sales process so well in the beginning has benefited her greatly going forward, because now she has one of the best performing sales teams in the entire system. And for several years, I mean, we're 6 years in, I mean, probably for the last 3.5 to 4 years, she's only had to go run sales appointments if she wants to, which she does enjoy doing it from time to time because she thinks it keeps her sharp. It keeps her in tune, with what our clients are saying. Therefore, it helps her be a better trainer and mentor to the salespeople on her team today. Or like, we had a designer break her foot, unexpectedly a couple of weeks ago. She had to go pick up a couple of appointments to cover just so we didn't have to reschedule. But that's allowed her to kind of step back and then focus much more strategically on the business, right? So how can we get leads outside of our paid marketing and advertising, which, that's what's really allowed us to take this business to new levels, grow the top line, increase profitability. But it's also given us a lot more of that flexibility and control of our time. So anyways, I'm sure there's more we can unpack there, but that's kind of how it evolved for us. And, it's never like a perfect line either, right? There's always ups and downs, right? There's been times where she felt great about the team that we had in place, right? And then something happens, whether it's a designer breaking a foot or, we had one of our best designers ever, they moved 4 hours away, and that was kind of an unexpected thing, so she had to go replace this very successful salesperson on the team. So, you're going to have ups and downs where, as soon as you feel like, all right, I've got a great team, I've got kind of everything where I want it, buckle up, because chances are something's going to change,
Yeah.
and you're going to have to, pivot and make adjustments. But, it's been a steady, I guess you would say, improvement over time of the business growing providing more income, but also, the amount of time that she's having to put in, especially the amount of time that's reactive, um, has been decreasing pretty steadily. And so at this point, 6 years in, it's an extremely lifestyle friendly business, but it didn't get that way overnight.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think doing sales in the beginning is the best thing you could do as an owner because you're learning what the customer wants and the challenges. Um,
100%.
can you walk me through so as far as her selling? Was there like a call center? Like did the calls go to her specifically or first a call center?
Yeah. So ShelfGenie has a call center, which I think, I think most home service businesses probably should, especially if it's a business that relies on a lot of outbound marketing and advertising. Because if that's working, then that's going to generate, a steady stream of inbound leads or inquiries. And it's real easy, for a new franchise owner to get bogged down just trying to keep up with answering the phone, right? Or you add a bunch of overhead by hiring a full-time person, to handle the phones for you. And call centers are not perfect, that's for sure. And there's plenty of, I guess, negatives that come with a call center, but for me it's really nice to just have that piece handled. um get the appointments on the books for us, and then we'll take it from there. So yeah, Shelf Genie's always had a call center. And my wife Kelly's done a really good job over the years of, outside of the paid marketing and advertising we do with Shelf Genie, developing some really good strategic partnerships and referral sources. And she's always thought outside of the box, like what I would call our ground game, right? Our kind of grassroots marketing has always been really strong. And so anyways, like she will get calls from leads, but it's more these strategic partnerships, right? Where, we've got a professional organizer that probably sends us, 6 high quality leads a month on average. Like, she's not calling the call center. She's got my wife's cell, and, they're talking directly on stuff like that. But in general, the call center, the marketing and advertising, like there was a lot of support in place that put us in a position to really come out of the gates quick and get to building the business instead of having to figure out and put all these different pieces in place that are necessary just to really start operating. And that's what, really any good franchise is going to bring to the table initially, is the framework's already there. So you get to go start building a business and generating revenue.
Did did you find so if you don't mind me asking, was that call center internal or an outsourced call center?
So when we started, it was internal. Today it's outsourced. So Shelf Genie went through an acquisition probably 4 years ago or so, 3.5 years ago. Uh, so now Shelf Genie is owned by Neighborly, which is a very large conglomerate. They own 20 plus home service franchise brands under that Neighborly umbrella. So now it's an outsourced call center that Neighborly has worked with for years, and many of their brands work with. But initially, it was internal. My wife and I were just talking about this the other day. I think if it can be done internally, that's ideal. But from what I've seen, that has to be started very, very early, when a brand is still small, and then those types of support have to scale with the brand. I think it's very difficult to go back, once you're a certain size as a brand, and then try to build out internal support centers like that.
Yeah, I go back and forth. I use these podcasts sometimes to just talk through my own
Yeah.
own things. I go
Yeah.
back and forth on it. I have a background in call center. I always joke that I would rather, I'm on the whatever floor here, I would jump out the window than start another call center.
Dude, I
Uh,
can't imagine. Yeah, that's one of those businesses for me. I'm like, I'm glad it's there, but I'm so glad I don't have to manage it.
the challenge is the best provider for call center in the home services space in franchising. There's only one. And what I wish was there was more content out there around what good looks like versus what else is out there. Because with call center, I get it. most people expect Jordan Belfort to be on the phone, but the reality is, it's a call center agent. Um,
Yeah.
I go back and forth on it because, someone knowing the business intimately and working, I think is huge. I think the challenge, like that's one ingredient. Hire a good salesperson that knows the business you can do, but now you got to remember they got to be available 24/7,
Yep.
nights and weekends,
Yep.
whether it's shifts or whatever. There's the technology. There's so much to it, and I've recently seen another large company do that and then pivot back to outsourcing it. And so
Yeah.
that's a good conversation. I don't know the right answer.
Yeah, well, and look, I can tell you this, there's not a perfect option. Like no matter which way you go, no call center, internal call center, outsource, like there's going to be imperfections with all of it. And I think a big part of it is like really study your industry, right? And maybe that helps show you what the better option is because I think anytime you're scaling a business, whether it's the franchisor or the franchisee, like one of the biggest things you have to get comfortable with is not being perfect, right? Like I think a lot of people waste a lot of time trying to make sure everything's perfect before they hit go, and you're only going to be able to get but so far with that
Yeah.
mentality, and it kind of sounds counterintuitive, but it's like I think in some cases you have to be comfortable just maybe being a little bit better than average, right? So like in the ShelfGenie instance, right, like we have very little in terms of what I would consider direct competition, right? Direct competition in the sense of like other people that can provide as high quality and highly customized of a product as what we do. And the ones that we do are like local handymen, that have a shop in their garage and they're very skilled craftsmen, but they don't have a call center. They're not using technology. Like you're lucky if you get a call back from them a week after you've left them a voicemail. So again, if you're kind of comparing it to others in your industry, like because our call center now is offshore, right? And like there's things about that drive us crazy, but the phone's getting answered every single time, right? I think there is a pretty good process in place so that the call center agent does not need to be the expert. Like it's their job to get the client booked with an expert, right? And
Yeah.
because of our type of business, like even if they're talking to an expert, there's only so much that expert can do over the phone. They really need to get out there and look at it. So like I think it's far better than us trying to manage it ourselves or not having it, but it's definitely not perfect.
Yeah, I sometimes think it's like there's options. You got an external call center option as a franchisee, you got an internal, and you decide which one you
Yeah.
want to use. All I know is, oh, good.
No, I would say I think that's good. You just got to have enough adoption of the internal option, to cover the cost of building it out.
Right.
So yeah, man, it's tough decisions, and there's not one right answer or one perfect option. And when you're on your side of the table and you have franchisees, it's kind of like having kids. Like you're never going to make them all happy.
Well, it's
So
interesting. I adopt this mindset when it comes to being a franchisor, which is that franchise companies do grow the way they grow, in my opinion, because there's this healthy tension between franchise owners and us. We're pushing them, and they're pushing
mhm.
us, and no matter how much you grow, that push is always there. And I heard this Jeff Bezos quote that I really like. Well, not quote, but what he says is like, if you focus on your competition, it's easy to get ahead of the bar. Like you can raise the bar pretty easily. I don't mean being arrogant, but like competition, it's like it's easy to be ahead of them. And then you're like, well, we're doing better than our competition. But if you focus on the customer, which in our case is the franchise owner, they are, like you said, they're divinely dissatisfied.
Yeah,
But if you can embrace that and you can say, all right, like instead of being like, well, this is like, for my example, the call center we use is better than anything out there when it comes to home services. The only thing that would be better would be if we somehow did that internally. And when you
yeah,
accept that uh, solutions don't have to be made today, right? Like that's my biggest thing. It's like, hey, we're listening to you, but if you want us
yeah.
to solve this, we can't solve it today or this week or this month.
especially eh, especially if you're going to do it right, like you can't rush it and just patch something together really quick. And Yeah, that's an interesting conversation, that healthy tension between franchisors and franchisees. Because if you're really being honest as a franchisor, like would you ever really want every single one of your franchisees to be like, you know what, we're perfectly happy. Like we've got a nice business here. You guys are doing everything you can possibly do. Like, let's just kind of chill here. No, because then your business is going to stop growing, just like their business is going to. Like, you want that healthy. I think the key word is healthy, but you want the franchisees pushing you, right, to keep finding ways to help them grow, just like you want to push your franchisees. So yeah, I think it's a really natural thing, and it's why franchising works so well when it's done right. You're always going to have a little bit of that back and forth.
What I'm going to say is going to be contentious, or some people may not like, but I'm going to say it. This
Let's
is
go.
why I truly feel that there's a place for everything, and I'm not saying it's evil, but when you think about the methodology to growing a franchise, it's so similar to technology, right? Technology is an ever growing, ever evolving, and the best
Hmm.
tech companies, they listen to their customers and they improve, and there's iterations that happen for decades, right? Forever.
Yeah.
And it's like a piece of art, like on your wall there. It's never finished, right? If you can, art's never finished. And I think that's where, like, for example, PE comes into franchising, where it's a completely different methodology. You buy, you kind of hold, you flip. You don't really have VCs coming into franchising like you do in tech.
Yeah.
But I think that's the biggest thing. It's like, I know for me, it's easy to be like, nah, that call center is good enough. Nah, they don't know what they're talking about. Nah, but you start to look in the mirror like, all right, but you just said it's spot on. Can I ask my franchise owner to just be satisfied? I mean, that would be the death of our system, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a two-way street.
Yeah, well, and I think it's important for franchisees to understand and keep in mind too, because like I've never founded and led a brand like you're doing, but I've worked for a couple different franchisors. We sit in the franchisee seat right now. Uh, Franchisees tend to not like change, and a lot of times they need some real convincing as to why this change is going to be good. And like I have it with candidates that I coach through the franchise buying process now. A lot of people get hung up on like, well, look, I like how it is today, but like, what if the founder is not as involved 5 years from now? What if this happens? What if this happens? Like, you mentioned PE, like brands are getting acquired and rolled up pretty regularly these days. Like if you're buying a brand that's kind of a standalone today, there's a very high likelihood that that brand keeps growing. In a few years they're going to get acquired, right? But you can't let the fear of potential change in the future keep you from doing something today. And if you're really honest with yourself, like you wouldn't want everything to be exactly the same 5 years from now as it is today, like because that means you're not growing, you're not evolving. I think we're just wired to not like change. It's a tough thing for us to wrap our heads around.
Yeah, I think you're spot on about the call center being built early in, and I don't mean to be so focused on that, but I think that's a good point.
Are you guys
I go
using
back.
ProNexus for your call center?
Yeah, yeah, we use ProNexus, which a lot of home service companies do.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm pretty serious about this idea. And we're recording, and that's fine. I just told my team this, and our COO said the same thing. Zach, let's spend this. We've done a lot. We've done a lot in a short period of time. Let's spend the summer listening and watching, and then let's pick one or two projects that move the needle. But let's not pick them ourselves. Let's talk to franchise owners and help.
Yeah.
And not every pitter patter project. I tell people this all the time. I have two goals: to grow your business as a Voda franchise owner, and to grow Voda corporate. That's
Yeah.
it. And if it
Yeah.
doesn't relate to top line revenue, bottom line profit, or like improving a customer's or employee's life, let's
Yeah.
put it on the table. But like, there's only so many things we can work on it. And so I often, I think about the call center element often, and that's where that conversation
Yeah, at some
came
point
down
I'm
to.
I'm happy to like kind of cuz when I first started working for ShelfGenie, they had they had an internal call center and an internal marketing team, like more than most franchisors have in terms of marketing. Like most brands seem to have one or two marketing people that are kind of the liaisons between the franchisees and whatever third party vendors they're working with for marketing. Like ShelfGenie had they had people that did all the creative. They had people that bought the ads. Like they had, a 12-person marketing team at one point. Where it went wrong was they then spun it out into a sister company and then tried to go kind of like ProNexus has done with the call center, like offer this to other franchisors. And, so the two companies just kind of were no longer aligned. So then ShelfGenie went to ProNexus, which was great. I think ultimately why ShelfGenie moved away from ProNexus was because they could not interface with our internal system, which is a proprietary system and, I think built on some pretty antiquated tech. So for whatever reason, ProNexus could not accommodate
APIs were
working
probably
within our
not connecting.
system.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but now we've got one of these offshore call centers that Neighborly's worked with, and the quality's nowhere near what it was with ProNexus. And we're not really saving any money. They can work in our system somehow or another, though.
See, there you go. Look, you got better tech enablement, but lack of call. It's like there's all these ingredients. You got
There's
the
all these
technology.
trade-offs that you've got to make.
Yeah. Imagine I think about like, a few women out in, or men too, but out in Wisconsin, just answering the phones, and they're amazing, people. But then that could be great, but like, well, it's easy, maybe 9 to 5, but what do you do from, 6 to 9 a.m. and evenings and
Yeah.
weekends? And that's where I think this hybrid kind of solution makes sense to me. But then it's technology, right? And what I just said
Yeah.
is easy-ish, but it's those APIs. I mean, when you think about, in your business, you got Facebook ads,
Mm-hmm.
Google ads, local service ads, everything, all the things you're doing, all into one place, times hundreds of locations. It's a lot. It's a lot of tech.
It's a lot, and like the digital stuff's always changing, right? Like the best practices with Facebook ads and Google and all that's like constantly changing. So like you really need experts that can stay up to whatever the latest trend is on the digital marketing side. It's tough, man. There is really not a perfect solution. I will say this, as a franchise sales guy, when ShelfGenie had all of that under one roof in the corporate office in Atlanta, if I got people to Discovery Day, it was a sure thing unless we didn't approve them because it just showed so well, right? I mean, they had
The
this
call center.
yeah, I mean, all of it, right?
Yeah.
This whole floor of this massive building was ShelfGenie HQ, and you had, a call center with, you know, 15 to 20 agents working at any given time, and the lady that ran the call center and managed it was fantastic. We let candidates listen into calls. She was able to show on a big screen all the metrics that they look at every single day. It just showed so well. And then,
Yeah.
you've got this marketing department where it's just nice to be able to see, like, look, these are the people sitting here. You're actively observing them support the other ShelfGenie franchisees versus, and then like when I was still there, we started outsourcing some of this stuff, right? So like I had to bring two people in from the digital marketing vendor that we worked with, and they gave a shitty little canned presentation on a PowerPoint. It was totally different from a showing standpoint. But hard to execute too, hard to build out and execute. I mean, there's
I
no
think
telling how much money
yeah,
Alan
it's,
spent over the years.
yeah, sorry, I didn't interrupt you, but it's interesting because like what franchise owners don't always remember is that we want those jobs booked as much as you do, right? Like, why
Totally.
would we want to pass up revenue? And it's this idea that there's the predictability and consistency to like a ProNexus or other sources that, frankly, outweighs the other solutions. Like, to give you an example, if I answered the phone, Steve just told me we had like multiple hundred territory checks at FranDev. I mean, I could answer those territory checks better than anybody. I would catch every single map and sliver, and maybe
Yeah.
we miss candidates because a territory sold, but there's one nearby. And I hopefully have enough systems. But one of the things I always remind people is 80% of you, 80% of you is 100% awesome. Meaning, like, if you could get someone to do 80% as good as you would, then that's like, for example, can I sell franchises really well as the CEO of Voda? Absolutely. Even though that's a high um, revenue, high value activity, believe it, and it has been for me, just like your wife when she started.
Yep.
For me, I had to recently say, all right, well, one, Steve's actually better than me, right? That's the first thing to admit.
Steve's great. Yeah.
And two, there's things that I need to move toward, but we all do it. It's all different levels of business owners where we think I can do insert whatever job better than
Yeah.
everyone else. And like maybe you can, but 80% of you is 100% awesome.
Yeah, it's that like getting comfortable with imperfection, or like a mentor of mine used to always say, it's like, you have to really figure out, like, all right, what are the areas that are the best use of my time, and those are the areas that I want to try to be perfect in, right? And everything else you need to get comfortable being just good enough in. Right. So like territory checks is a great example of that. Yeah. If you took every single territory check because of your background selling franchises and being a consultant, all of that, like, you would probably give the most thorough responses to territory checks, but that's not the best use of your time as the CEO. And so, and you guys do have a good system in place, and that system will continue to, make improvements over time as you see opportunity to do so. So you need to be comfortable just being good enough there,
Yeah.
right? At least for the time being. But it's hard. Like, it's my wife talks about it all the time, because she was naturally so good at the sales part of the process. With ShelfGenie, it was really hard for her to start building that team out and letting go. And I don't know if you've ever heard Jack Daly talk. He's like a sales guru. He used to come and speak at the ShelfGenie conferences and then do like a breakout with all of the owners. And so he would always refer to it as like, you got to be okay watching the train wreck happen, right? So
Yeah.
like, as you're training a new salesperson and you bring them on an appointment, and maybe they've observed you on a couple of appointments, and now it's their turn to run the appointment. Like, the tendency is going to be to jump in and save them, right? Or try to save the sell if they're fucking something up. They're not going to learn their lesson as well if you let them just run it all the way through, let that train crash, and then coach them afterwards. And that was something I think that, like, because a lot of like what Kelly did in pharma didn't translate all that specifically to like home service sales. But I think the sales training that she's done and why she's been able to build out such a good team, she's been able to take a lot of what she got in pharma from her managers and apply that over here, right? So like, her managers would ride along on sales calls with her, and she had this one manager that was fantastic, and he would never say a word until they got back into the car after it, and then he would ask her, how do you think that went, right? And he would kind of almost let her like dissect it, and then he would give his coaching and his feedback. So like, Kelly's done a lot of that, with her sales team, where she rides along with them and she gives them coaching and feedback. But like, she really, really had to train herself to just shut up and observe in the appointment and do the coaching afterwards. And I think that's something most business owners struggle with as they're trying to scale their business. It's letting go and being comfortable with at least temporary lower performance in some of these areas of the business than you would be able to do if it were just you still doing it yourself.
I feel like that's a perfect example, and that just scales, right? So, give you an example. For me, I've been getting on meetings with my leadership team or any team, and I keep reminding myself, how do I put this? At 100 units, I have to learn how to play the video game. And what I mean by that is I sit in this chair and I have to learn how to get on meetings and just watch the movie. Okay.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
contribute. Just
Yeah.
watch the movie. And then here and there, bring people back to maybe the direction. But you know how hard that is to, like, when something's so tight, it's your baby. And you say, you know what? I got to just not contribute. And so, like, what we've put as a culture at Voda is the most junior people talk first in meetings, then middle management, then leaders, and then I'll chime in at the end because people want to go with what their boss says.
Yeah.
And we want to encourage, like, hey, you know what? That junior person's on the front lines. They're closer to the problem.
Yep.
But it's just so interesting because you're right. You got to let all the way down the org. You got to let people fail, basically.
Yeah, you do. And if they're the right people, that failure will teach them much faster than you jumping in before they actually have the chance to fail and kind of saving them or bailing them out. But I mean, that's a muscle that you've got to work. I think for most people at least, but yeah, Jack Daly, he's a beast, man. And he was very instrumental over the years in helping ShelfGenie as a whole, kind of evolve their sales process. And, I think my wife would give him a lot of credit for like some of what she's learned. And he's a nut, man. He's like in his 70s and does triathlons and Ironmans and stuff. He's been on my podcast once and has actually come on again, I think in a month or so. But he's a wild guy for sure.
So let me ask you a question. We were talking about content, and it's funny. I was when we took a quick break, I was thinking about how in the past I might think like I got to stop at 11. I got a million other things to deal with, and what I've realized about content is, if I told you, let's say for your franchise consulting business, you could speak in front of 5 prospective owners every day in front of them, you went to some panel or whatever, would you take the time to do that every single day? You would, right?
Yeah.
And that's this aha moment I had about content where I'm like, wait a minute, you can literally make things on the internet and then put it online. And then like every day people watch it. And it's funny, I make these videos that I know you see, and I see people like yourself and other consultants liking it, hitting the like button. And I'm like, all right, like even if all this video did was keep me front of, just candidly, front of mind in front of consultants that bring us candidates, then it's already solved. It's already hit its objective. But my question is like, do you do the same thing? I know you put out a lot of content with your Freedom podcast, but do you do that in the business too, as far as in home services? Like, are you guys putting out home service content?
Yeah, we are. And it's something that we want to do a lot more of. In fact, like I've been pushing my wife to start a podcast, because I think there's a lot of, even if, because like our Wilmington and Myrtle Beach, right? Like we don't own a national business, right? So, we wouldn't even necessarily need to try to reach beyond the areas that we cover in that business. But I think there's a lot of value in doing that, especially if it's done the right way, right? Where it's not like hey, tune in once a week for a 60-minute ShelfGenie commercial, but it's more just like, talking about like, because our business is all about organization and making things more functional and easier to get to all these things that you use and touch on a daily basis, whether it be in your kitchen or your bathroom or your closet. Like there's so many topics that you could talk about along those lines and so many guests and experts that you could bring in so that it's, this informational podcast for anyone interested in organizing or downsizing or, optimizing these high traffic areas of their home. And it's brought to you by ShelfGenie, but it's not just shoving ShelfGenie down your throat. Like you do a good job of that with your content because you're not just always like talking about Voda. You're just, I think, showing good behind the scenes of like what it's like building this company, and you're giving good practical advice that really any entrepreneur is going to probably benefit, or even an aspiring entrepreneur is going to benefit from. So, I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to find like a business where it didn't make sense for the owner or the business itself to really be focusing on putting out more and more content. And if you go back to, what you mentioned earlier from Hormozy, because I don't get caught up in how many likes does a video get or any of that. Like, I don't have that big of a reach. And I don't really care.
People that want to buy a franchise, who cares?
Well, that, and it's, if you're putting out stuff that's mostly evergreen, like, I don't need someone to see it and like it the day I put it out. Because let's say someone sees one of my videos, right, and it piques their interest. That could have been a video I put out 6 months ago. But if they're like the statistics you shared, where on average they're going to consume 7 hours of my content before they're going to be ready to engage with me. But if they do that and then they engage, there's more trust, there's more credibility, there's, easier rapport. Well, like, I better have a lot of content out there, if someone's going to go and be able to do enough research on me and what I talk about to be comfortable reaching out and actually engaging.
No, 100%. You could almost make a podcast like about, maximizing your home. It's like, it could be so broad. And then, I'm going to do something kind of fun here as we wrap up. I'm going to share my screen for people that are watching. So here's an example. So if you look me up, right, you got, this is cool that this goes up to the top here, but I've got cool. this YouTube channel, right? Then you got all these videos. Maybe I won't be able to find it quickly, but you go to this podcast and I'm like, wait a minute. I just had this epiphany actually this morning. There's look at all these episodes, 119 episodes, right? Why is that not on, this YouTube page? Yeah. And then what's even crazier is somehow, I'm learning, I've got another channel. And it's like, what am I doing? I'm actually going to work with my team where everything, if you Google Dan Claps or YouTube, it should all be in one. Imagine if I had 100 videos here, I'd already have more authority. Yeah. But, we got a lot of similar contacts and, we could have just done a live stream. Yeah. Now I'm live. Start screen share, entire screen, share.
Yeah, I did one of these a couple weeks ago to LinkedIn, and it wasn't like spontaneous. We kind of promoted it for a couple of weeks, but I did, just kind of like a webinar overview of franchising and frequently asked questions, and it wasn't that big of a deal. But I think 8 or 9 people joined live, but then another 20 some people like registered to attend. So they got a recording of it emailed to them. And there's just so much. And I think like when we talk about the content, so like you just kind of spontaneously live casting this or whatever, the format that you and I have done this in today, where like, it's not scripted. We didn't really have any specific topics picked up, right? Like, we just kind of had this ranging conversation. Like, I think that's more of what people want these days. I think the highly produced, canned type of content, people are just kind of fed up with it. They know 99% of that's bullshit and, it's fake. Like, people want genuine content, right? And so I think, put some effort into, have a decent camera, have a decent mic, but, it doesn't need to be this highly produced, TV worthy piece of content. I think people are like more and more turned off by that these days. And I think I heard Hormozy talking about that, where he was going to kind of shift to where pretty much all of his content was just low production, him on his phone, whenever he had a random thought that he wanted to share, more of that type of thing. So, there's something to it.
It's wild because the point of it was like, he got this was the difference between, I'm sure Jeremy Minor makes a ton of money, right? And I was like, the difference between me and Jeremy Minor is he doesn't just do a podcast, he triple dips. I think I got triple dip from Hormozy actually, but I'm going to do a podcast with someone I want to build a relationship with. I'm going to talk about topics help me like the call center thing, something I'm thinking about. I'm going to go live on Facebook, which has 2 viewers right now. Hello, viewers. You know, like, and I'm just going to do as much as I can. And like, dude, I would do these videos and then I wouldn't put them on reels. Like, you have to do it all. Is kind of, I think, the content game. But when you start to remember that you can literally be in front of all these people, why wouldn't you maximize that as much?
Yeah, and I think it's like not wanting a certain outcome, right? Like, oh, I want to do this podcast so I get X number of views, or I want to post this reel so I get X number of likes. Like, I think just focus on putting out genuine content or really information that's going to be valuable to someone, and just do that consistently, right? And then, you know, results will happen over time. Like, I've kind of done that with my podcast, where I've never made it just about franchising, because I mean, I had a number of reasons for that, but one of them was selfishly, like, I'm interested in learning about other things outside of franchising, right? And, you know, my kind of underlying premise of my entire business is, like, I want to help people get more freedom in their lives. I think business ownership is a great component of that, but it's not the only component, or not even necessarily necessary, right? I mean, how many real estate investors may not actually own a business, but they've invested in a ton of real estate, have all this passive income and all this net worth because of it, and, you know, they don't have to work. They don't have to work for someone because of it. There's so many different ways that someone can create freedom, and I'm, you know, talking financial and time freedom. You know, there's not just one pathway to that. There's a lot of different ways to get there. And, you know, I want to learn from other people that are doing cool things that are not just in the franchise space. And for me, that's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of rewarding. And I like to think it helps me, you know, attract more viewers or followers that maybe wouldn't be as attracted to like a franchise podcast.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. You got to do it for yourself, and then like the rest will kind of come together.
Well, and then I think that
awesome,
makes
Wes. I appreciate you know, you jumping on. I know we're coming up on the half hour. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Yeah, my website is path2freedom.com. So it's just PATH, the number 2, and then FRDM.com. So it's kind of short form for freedom. And then I do host a podcast. Dan's been a guest on the podcast. It's just the Path to Freedom podcast, and you can find that anywhere you listen to podcasts. We have been putting a lot more effort into the YouTube channel for the last 6 months or so. So all the podcasts are there in video format, and also other, you know, shorter form video content. And that's just Path number 2 Freedom if you search that on YouTube. Other than that, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I think it's my full name, Wesley Barefoot. But that's probably the best place to check out anything else that I've got going on.
Awesome. Thanks again.